Okay, it is the 9th of November 2013, and we are interviewing Lowell and Rose Davis at their home in Red Oak II in the state of Missouri. My name is Jerry Benner, and I'm doing the interviewing. Okay, so Lowell, we've walked around Red Oak II and seen what was developed here, and you want to fill us in on this interview on what got you to develop this, and then we'll go back and take a look at how you got to that point.
Let me give you the short version here. It's a long version.
Whatever is a good version.
Okay. I guess the way it had to start from the beginning, from Red Oak, what Red Oak was. And Red Oak is a community, the original Red Oak is a community about 30 miles east of here. And it's just off of 066. And both sides of my ancestors pioneered that area, so it had a lot of meaning to me. And then I had 4 or 5 sets of grandparents and great-grandparents that lived there, and my aunts and uncles and cousins, so about the entire town was a relative. And we were all poor. We raised our own gardens and had our own, Mom made her own clothes, you know, out of the feed sacks that come into the store, and his neighbor helping neighbors. And then in the 5th grade, I moved to Carthage.
Now, about what year?
Oh, I was probably 48, 49. And I didn't know I was poor till I moved to Carthage, and they told me I was, you know. So anyway, I was raised in Carthage here, and when I got out of the high school, I joined the Air Force. And I was fortunate enough to go to Europe, and I was a crew member, flight crew member, so I got to fly all over and see Europe and all the countries in Africa. And then I got home, I moved to Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I was an art director for an ad agency down there, a big ad agency. And
That would be about what year?
And that would be in the 60s, 1960 up to 74.
Okay.
And all I could think about while I was down there in that ad agency is staring out the window, wanting to farm back in Missouri. And so after 13 years, I finally made the move and bought this old fallen down farm next door here. And I started fixing it up, and I was gone for the total of about 20 years. And when I came back, all these buildings and general stores and country churches and country schools were all closed and would never get another roof or another paint job. And so my hobby was photographing all these buildings before and get them documented before there was no more. In fact, I can go through all my photographs, and like over 3/4 of the buildings and barns and things that I photographed are no longer there. And then I started feeling sorry for these, and at the same time, these buildings were falling down, so was the family farms. And the bigger farmers were buying them up and bulldozing them out. And so I started photographing all the farms and all around the outbuildings and the corn cribs and the privies and all that.
Do you still have all those photographs?
Yeah, most of them, yeah, they're in that files in there. And then I started feeling sorry for these outbuildings, and I started picking them up and moving them to the farm. I started with privies and corn cribs, but then my neighbor told me, he come over and said, "Lowell, if you put any more buildings on that place, it's going to sink," because I had like 9 privies and 2 or 3 corn cribs and 5 to 6 chicken houses and everything. So. And I was building a museum farm at the same time. I was self-sufficiency. I had all the work horses and buggy horses, and I didn't have a lot of livestock, but I had my models. I had the cows and the bulls and the sheep.
Models were
for my sculpting and my paintings. And then I did that for quite a while, and I started using my animals as my models and my figurines and my paintings, and it took off. And because my theory was the Western art was huge at the time. In fact, all the shows that I'd gone to previously were Western art shows. No one was doing the farm scenes. And my thought was there's more people raised on a farm than there ever was on a ranch, so I thought I had a good shot at it, which I did. I mean, it just took off. And it started selling in 2,000 gift shops and department stores all over the United States, Canada, and in Europe. And I started making all this money, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I had a huge collector base at the time. There was my distributor was out of Boston, and they started this collector club, and I had about 6,000 members to this club. And so then I started moving these buildings in. And to me, this was a big cornfield, and it was to me of an artist, and it was like a blank canvas. And my art material, although I'm a painter and a sculptor, my art material was what somebody else threw away. So all of Red Oak is what somebody else threw away. I just put it together and it ended up looking like a town. And it was mainly built, there's no rhyme or reason for it. You know, I mean, if it wasn't a commercial venture. If I was going to build a commercial venture, I would have put it on I-44 or something. It was just for the club members. And we had a huge events here every fall. We'd bring in tents and barbecue and these big old pots and bean pots, and it'd last for about 3 or 4 days, and collectors come in from all over the United States.
Collectors of your
figurines.
And your paintings,
yeah.
Figurines and that.
And a lot of them would even come out of Canada. And these were houses here that I moved in were bed and breakfasts. They were all decorated to that period. The general store was all decorated to the period, and then the restaurant was there and the pub, and it was just mainly for my collectors.
So you were actually operating a restaurant?
Yeah.
A pub like every day or
yeah.
on the weekends?
Plus I was doing that and then on the road all the time and doing my art, and it just got a little too much for me. And after a while I got a divorce. My wife couldn't understand why I was doing all this and all the money that was going into it, and there was no money ever coming back off of it except a few donations, you know, that I get. But so after about every building, you know, it'd say, you know, $35,000 for that little building or $60,000 for that building. How are you going to make any money off of that or something? So, but it never was. It never was meant to make money. And finally she couldn't take it anymore, and so we had this huge auction, and we sold all the interiors to the bed and breakfast and the general store and the restaurant. And she moved to New York City to get her sanity back. I talked to her about 3 or 4 nights ago on the phone. I don't think the poor child's found it yet, but anyway, she's still looking for it. And I couldn't keep up with it all, so I had to sell it off to other people and let them mow and paint and fix up. And I just sat on my front porch now and smoke my pipe and drink my coffee and watch them do all that.
Really do.
Yeah.
So so it really kind of started out trying to preserve things.
Yeah, that's what it.
And it kind of evolved into a place to have fun, enjoyment.
That's all I can think about. I just try to preserve it and just
So it was
try
more
to put
of
it.
a hobby than a business.
Yeah,
enterprise.
definitely that.
So about what year did you start selling everything off?
Oh, probably
5 years ago.
1998, 1999. That's when it all started coming apart.
Yeah.
And so we gave the farm to my daughter, and then I moved over in this house. It's the Belle Starr house, the notorious woman outlaw. She was.
Right. Where did you find that?
It was on Spring River, about 23 miles to the east, over in Kansas. I mean, almost Kansas line, and my uncle owned it. And he always told me that Belle Starr was born in that house because he had a son my age and he lived right on the river. And so I was there all in the weekends and in the summertime, and I didn't pay much attention to it. But then here in the Carthage courthouse, I painted a mural. And the research on it was, you know, I got all involved in the research,
Right.
more so than the painting the mural, and that's when I started studying Belle Starr, and then I went back to the records and found out she was born in that house, and her dad owned it and everything. And
Now, where was that house?
in Galesburg. It's a
Galesburg.
town called Galesburg,
In
and there was a
Missouri?
mill there.
In Missouri? Or?
Yeah, Missouri, just on the line over there. There's an old mill on it, and it was the last mill before you headed west, because there was nothing after that, you know. I mean, you were no man's land after that, so that mill was very popular. That's a millstone out of it. See those kind of horsetails done?
Yeah.
That's a millstone out of it. And anyway, that's where this comes from, this house did.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've heard of Belle Starr.
Yes.
So-
After you start reading about her, you can't put it down. I mean, I've read 10 complete books on her, and 3 movies made of her, and then hundreds of thousands of articles. And I mean, you just get really fascinated by
The
her.
accuracy of the movies may be questionable.
Yeah.
She was like Jesse James.
Well,
many
yeah.
Rumors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most of it was rumors or something, and you know, but a lot of people would come by here in Red Oak and visit, and they'd say, "Oh, I'm a relative of somehow Belle Starr," and but you know, I never paid too much attention to it because there were so many. Because the Stars was the big name, you know, because
Right.
she had married a Cherokee. Her husband's father was the chief of the Cherokee, and his name was Sam Starr, or yeah, and she wasn't a bad person. Okay, she was. Then when she was 11 years old, they moved to Carthage, and her father owned the entire north side of the square. Well, they were slave owners, and they were Southern sympathizers.
Right.
And this was border country. This was neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother, and so all these towns were burnt to the ground. Her father owned a livery stable and a tavern and something else, an inn, on the north side of the square, and they were burnt to the ground during the Civil War. And her brother fought with Quantrill's raiders, and he was ambushed, and that set her off on a rampage. And then they moved to Texas, outside of Dallas, after they left Carthage here, and so her brother rode with Quantrill's Raiders, and who rode with Quantrill's Raiders was Jesse James, Frank James, Cole Younger, and all those guys. And so just because Lee and Grant signed a truce, it didn't mean that they signed a truce, because their property had been confiscated by carpetbaggers, and their parents had been killed, and all kind of other things that happened. So they were out to rob Yankee banks, and for revenge more than anything else. They were kind of Robin Hoods, you know. They just robbed the banks, and then they gave it away and blew it and all that
That's what
stuff.
the rumors are.
Huh?
Yeah, my wife's mother's family lived on a farm, and at the end of the Civil War, this is Howard County in the middle of the state, the land was taken away because they were Confederates. And
Yeah.
then, like 10, 12 years later, her father's family bought the farm. They didn't know each other. So the farm technically follows the two families up through us today. But it was part of the Civil War. Stuff was taken away.
Yeah, and we have the Dalton Gang house out here. That's the farthest house it came from. It's a blue house down at the south end of town. It came from Veneta, Oklahoma. And I don't know how I ended up with 2 outlaw houses, but anyway, I did. And most of the other houses were just, I got them for architectural. I started on, when I got all the houses out of Red Oak, I got my grandpa's house, my great-grandmother's house, I got my grandpa's blacksmith shop, I got the general store I was raised in the back of, and a few other buildings. And then after I got all the buildings out of Red Oak that I wanted, I started on Route 66. I'm just ahead of the bulldozers. You know, if I hadn't got them, they would have been gone shortly after. And when I got them, they were basket cases, you know. And then after I got all the ones I went there, the 2 gas stations come off of 66, and a couple of the other houses, buildings
You
around
said
here.
they were from a villa?
It's a villa, and there's some on farther out, you know. towards Rescue. I used to live in Rescue. It's on 66 there. My dad had a garage there, and we lived in there during the war, and for a short time. And then I started for architecture buildings, around locally that I could move in. So that's kind of how Red Oak evolved. And now that I'm broke, I had to get me a sugar daddy. And so the mayor here at Carthage used to be the mayor here. He lived in a big mansion and in an exclusive area, and he wanted to move out here and be a hillbilly with the rest of us. So he built a new house down in the south end of town.
I've seen that.
And we've got some buildings coming in that he's financing. Down on the end, there's 3 duplexes that came off Route 66 in Joplin, and then there's the Nell House. It's a beautiful 1920s house. We're moving it in out there, but that's his now.
That's
and
where that construction is.
yeah, and I really don't have much control over that, but at least it's somebody's carrying it on.
But it's within the spirit
Yeah, it's all.
of what you were doing, so, yeah. So how did, you said you're an artist and painter and a sculptor. So why don't you go into that a little bit? Because obviously that's important for this whole place to even come about.
Well, as I said, I was an art director, and that was commercial art. And I wasn't really happy doing that all the time,
Were you doing the art, or were you?
Yeah, I was doing a lot of it, and then I had other.
Training?
Huh?
Where'd you get training?
I had no training. I knew when I was a little kid that I didn't want to work for a living, so I decided to be an artist. And I knew I wanted, because everybody's, my relatives, my grandmother's and aunt's house, I'd go in their house and I could memorize every one of the prints hanging on the wall, And my parents didn't understand. They were all farm. They didn't understand someone wanting to be an artist, but they didn't discourage me, but they didn't know really how to help me that much. And because my only art exposure was Saturday Evening Post would come into the general store, and I'd study that like a Bible. I couldn't wait and see all the illustrators. Norman Rockwell, he was my hero. And I think a lot of people say, Lowell, most of your paintings tell a story. I said, well, that's from being impressed, I think, from Norman Rockwell, because his all told a story. Not that I do anything like Norman Rockwell. Mine's mostly with animals and farm animals and things like that. But still, that part of it was from that. And then I moved to Carthage, and I had a teacher in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade that knew I had talent, and so she encouraged me a lot. And being my parents were still poor, they did buy me a paint set for Christmas, but then I couldn't afford. There was a woman here in town. Her name was Mrs. Esterly, and she gave art lessons on Saturday for 50 cents, a student. And so my old teacher from Mark Twain paid for 3 years, she paid my art lesson. And because there was no art exposure here, there was none in schools or high schools. There was a little bit in high school, but he was a football coach, and an art teacher filling in and everything. And I failed English and art my sophomore year. And it wasn't that I think I told my art teacher that I knew more about art in my little finger than he did. And I think that's what really upset him, and that's why he failed me at the end of the year. But then I went and joined the Air Force, and I went to Europe, and anytime I got a chance, I was painting over there and studying art and talking to artists, and it was in my blood. But when I get back to the States, I'm just strictly a commercial artist, and I'm trying to paint at night to start being established as an artist, as a painter. And I found out that where I was having problems with my paintings, that I knew different artists, that I could go to them and they would, tell me where I was making my mistakes or what I could do to improve it. So that's about my only art education, was from different artists. And so I was painting wildlife all the time I was living in Arlington, in Dallas area. And then when I moved to the farm, I'm still doing wildlife. And I'm going to art shows all over the country, and you know,
What type of art are you?
I was wildlife. I was doing wildlife sculptures and
Paintings?
paintings and bronzes and sculptures.
Okay, so you were doing sculpture at this
Yeah.
time too.
In bronzes, and that's when I first, you know, and then when I started my farm and started gathering my animals, and I started painting them because, you know, I mean, I'm painting moose, but I've never seen a moose but a couple of times out in the wild, you know. And but my farm animals, I knew them inside out. I knew everything about them. I knew their habits and so that's what I should have been painting. And that's when I started doing that. That's when my success happened. And
So then you got into sculpturing figurines,
and
essentially, right?
then I started doing the farm animals, and there was this Boston distributor that distributed gifts to all these gift shops and department stores. That's how I got into, you know, so many different department stores. And again, it was a success. I mean, they would just, I mean, I just couldn't keep up with it all. My figurines were, I would sculpt them here and I would send them to Scotland. And because this young Scottish guy invented this new porcelain. First I started with Germany. I did a figurine line for them, a traditional porcelain. But with traditional porcelain, you get a 17% shrinkage, and it's so involved you almost have to be raised in a porcelain factory to know how the molds were all made, and so complicated, and the colors would change when you fired them and all this.
Yeah.
But with this new porcelain this young Scottish guy invented, I mean, I could do anything and they could pull a mold off of it and paint them or whatever you wanted to. I mean, it didn't have any effect. So I sculpted them, used to sculpt them in wax. And then then I took these sculptures to Scotland, and the molds were made. And then it took about 2 weeks for them to make the molds of the.
See, like lost wax.
No, that bronzes is lost wax. Okay. Yeah, and so I would drive around Europe for 2 weeks and come back to Scotland when they had the white copies were made for me, and then I would sit with their painters and paint the white copies the way I want them, and then I'd come on back and for the next year.
Copy it.
Yeah, and then they're the ones that produced and put it all over, and they started the clubs and all that, and. Then after 60 years in business, they went bankrupt. And so then I signed up with ERTL Toys. They make the farm tractors and
right,
all that.
Metal toys.
Yeah, metal. They did a beautiful job, you know, beautifully executed, but they sat there and said nothing and did nothing. So my job was to put figurines on them, you know, drivers and things going on, and maybe mechanics working on them and stuff. I did a lot of that with workhorses and mules pulling some of their precision type equipment, you know, like they'd had manure spreaders, horse-drawn manure spreaders and sulky rakes and things like this. And they used my teams to pull it, and then they would use my drivers for that. And then that went on for 4 years and was very successful. And then they got bought out by a cold cast company out of Chicago. And I'm not a cold cast, but a die cast company out of Chicago. And they were purists. They didn't want any porcelains or anything with it, so that was kind of the end of my ERTL figurine line. But I had so many thousands of collectors, and they would come here, you know, in the big events, and I would go on the road all the time and see them, and they still come by a lot, you know, and most of my tourists are Europeans and South Americans and Asians. I get very few Americans come through. I can tell the Americans from Europeans because Europeans, they walk through and take pictures, and Americans will drive through and crack the window down and shoot out the window.
Yeah, I don't know. It's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. So, and that's really was quite profitable for you.
I started a Route 66 series before Route 66 became popular. I did figurine line in them. You know, I had gas stations and drive-in movies, and porcelain, and a lot of small, you know, figurines. And I went out this spot. It's right here in Carthage, about 4 miles of the old 66. Has never been, you know, never been done anything with it. And I'd send huge chunks of it. I'd get chunks of it and send it over to Scotland. And they, with my 66 figurines, they made a little lucite block, a little lucite square with stamped Route 66 on it, and inside of it was a piece of old Route 66. And that went with every figurine that they bought that had a Route 66 series. So
The Route 66 Association started in 1990.
yeah,
So if you were doing this before 1990,
yeah.
that's pretty much before anybody was getting.
Yeah, there was nothing much on. In fact, I had copyrights on the Route 66 seal. U.S. Route 66 seal had the copyrights on it, but somewhere that didn't renew it or something.
I don't know. Obviously, the shields, I guess, were public property, but they always had the state.
Yeah,
Like Missoura 66. I don't remember seeing any real U.S. 66. It was always Missouri, Illinois,
yeah.
or one of the 8.
Oh.
So what's happened with all the sculpturing in that now?
Most of my sculptors were retired, or you know, they were elderly because most of my collectors were either raised on a farm or spent time on their grandfather's farm, had good memories, and that's why mine was so popular.
Now, the years when you were doing a lot of this would be from mid-60s through.
Now, I moved back to Missouri in 1974,
Okay.
and then probably I didn't really hit about 1979 or something, right in there, before I really started, you know.
And it all kind of went away in the 90s, I'm assuming? Or?
Late 90s, yeah, just before the turn, yeah.
So now if someone wants to buy some of your porcelain.
They just have to go to eBay. And as I said, most of my collectors were elderly and had huge collections, and then they probably gave them to their inheritance to their grandkids, and their grandkids didn't know what to do with them, and so they got them on eBay. And that's why you can find a lot of my work on eBay, because of selling their collections.
Probably selling for more than
yeah.
whoever sold it for.
Yeah.
I'm sure. So,
but I don't do anything anymore. I've got arthritis, and I don't paint or sculpt anymore. I still like my junk sculptors. You'll see some of them going to town on 66. I've got the old car on the pole down there.
Red Oak II.
And I used to have Red Oak II on it, but then they made me, the DOA made me take Red Oak II off. Luckily, they allowed me to leave the sculpture up.
Yeah.
And we're trying to get it where, you know, because I didn't get any government subsidies here. I didn't ask the government for nothing. You know, this was all out of pocket. And it gets all this tourist, and they won't let me have a sign down there, you know, on the corner of 66 to come up here. And
Because you're not, I don't know, you're not commercial.
no, I'm not commercial.
If you were a restaurant, you could have a sign.
No, not on 66. It's it dates back to highway beautification from Lady Bird Johnson, and that's what it is. And I'm telling them, you know, this is not art, it's a sculpture, you know, these are sculptures, and I'm not making any money off of it. If I had a business, then I could see maybe why they would.
Well, I'll tell you, they're in Fayette, Missouri, where I went to college, and also it's the county seat of where our farm is. And they painted the side of a building as you come in. It is a state highway that you're coming in on. They painted the side of the building, and local businesses and that all put stuff up there, and the state made them take the phone numbers down. They said it's okay to have the names of all the businesses, that's one thing, but it can't be advertising. And if you put the phone number, that's advertising.
Yeah.
So they had to go through and take all the phone numbers out, and, you know, it's nice when you come into town, it looks good,
Yeah.
but there's no phone numbers.
Did you leave me a card when you were here last?
I did, I have one I can leave you.
Is it got pictures of buildings on it?
Yeah, going across the town.
What were these buildings again?
Those buildings were at a Chautauqua.
That's who you are. Okay, I've got the card on my front porch there, and I keep thinking, no, this sounds interesting because you were telling me this was like in the 20s or something like that, or 30s or
1880.
1880s.
The Chautauqua movement was started, and basically, I guess it was, if you were going to assign a religion to it, it was probably Methodist, of that nature of religion. And the idea was to be able to get out of cities and that and go have recreation, religion, and relaxation, and also physical fitness. So a number of there were also tents that went around that took speakers. William Jennings Bryan was a big Chautauqua speaker, as were a lot of other famous orators at the time. So about 1880 this started, and in some areas they actually built hotels, usually around springs and that, and usually around water. The big Chautauqua is in upstate New York. That's where Lake Chautauqua is, and that's where the huge Chautauqua is. And they still operate a summer season. So where I am is a very small Chautauqua up north of St. Louis on the Mississippi River in a valley that cuts back through the bluffs. There are about 120 houses or cottages in there. Many of the cottages were actually like dormitory little.
Are they still there, or some of them?
Yeah, my cottage was about 1900. Some of course, have been added on to and built up, but those three buildings are the community buildings, and they date back to around turn of the century. So the Chautauqua operates the summer season from June through Labor Day, and but it's kind of like a condominium in that I own the cottage, but the Chautauqua owns the ground on which. So, and it's like a condominium that you're approved to buy into it and all that. I have no idea. Obviously, money wasn't the reason you get approved. And so they operate a summer season, which will include they hire a drama person to work with teenagers, the youth, and adults. So they'll do 2-3 plays. They'll bring in local speakers, local musical groups. We have an auditorium, which dates back to about 1900, actually 1885. And so it's designed, there'll be teaching sessions by people who live there, or actually we don't live there. We use it in the summer.
And I said, your card's sitting right there before you go, and I look at it once in a while and thinking, I wish I knew more about this, or if I get up in that area, I want to look this up.
There are 5 existing Chautauquas. And well, if you ever give me a call,
yeah,
obviously there is a gate, because when you drive up the river road, you'd be inundated with tourists coming in, and security is an issue because only, I think, 10 people are allowed to live there year-round. So it's not designed to be a residence. It's designed to be a place to get away from the city. And my grandson loves it. He can get on his bike. He can ride anywhere on the grounds he wants. Everybody knows him, you know, and if they do something wrong, it's like a small town. So if you think about 1900, that's about what it's like. So
Neat.
That's a Chautauqua.
What's that? There's a bend in the river, and it had something like an Indian name, or Arrowhead, or something. Is there?
That's on Missoura. Right?
That Missoura, yeah, that's right.
Missoura.
Yeah.
It's Lewis and Clark stopping point. That's a neat place to go visit.
I've been there.
It is a 1850 community, and a lot of the houses date to that. And
I was coming back from, I always, you know, ERTL Toys was in Dyersville, Iowa. And so I would go to St. Louis or go in Hannibal there and go up north and follow the river on up. Always on the Missouri side. Never went on the other side. One time I was coming back, I come around this bend and there's this town. Now, what is this? And it was that Mormon town up there. And where they got all, they restored it all, and the brick companies and all that.
I've been there.
That's neat.
I can't think of the name of it now. Nauvoo,
Nauvoo?
Illinois. Yeah. So, was there anything else you'd like to add? Because obviously we walked around and talked, and I've got a lot of information there.
Yeah, I think that's probably.
What I wanted to get here was something leading up to the founding and that. So, well, I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you coming down.
And finding out all about what this place is.
Now, you read my autobiography, you'll find out more.